How's it going, everybody? Welcome back to Culture Colosseum. My name is Nate, and today we're going to discuss the top 5 books in literature. Now, before we get started, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel if you want more content similar to this. Now, let's jump right into this list. So, at number 5, we're going to start off with The Sun Also Rises by Ernest Hemingway. This may not be a choice that immediately makes sense. But what this book does is it captures, in effect, the experiences of soldiers coming back from World War I, which is a very important element. It also, in doing so, deals with its human characters very, very well. And that's what really makes this book a classic, is the interactions between the characters. Even without the backdrop of World War I, the main character is, a wounded soldier, and he's trying to figure out, what that means for his manhood in a lot of ways, if you've read the book. And how his relationships with the other characters work. It's really a study of the human condition, I think, and especially how traumatic stress, like the First World War, which scarred an entire generation, how that affects a person, and how a person can kind of come to terms with that in not necessarily the best way. Something important this book also does is it launched the career of Ernest Hemingway, and that's important because Ernest Hemingway is one of the most prolific writers of the 20th century, rather. There's one other book of his on this list, and he really is a master of the craft, especially in, his iceberg style of writing. Just his prose is very tight. He's a very, very good writer. Moving on to the second book, which may be a strange choice as well, because it's really more of a play than a book itself, is Arthur Miller's Death of a Salesman. Now, again, this deals with the human condition, specifically the sins of the father. I find that to be a very interesting theme to explore in literature. There's another book by August Wilson called, it's not a book, it's a play. Well, it is a book, but it's also a play called Fences by August Wilson, which deals with among race issues that it explores in early to mid 20th century America. It also explores the idea of sins of the father and how parents reflect on their children. More importantly, however, in Death of a Salesman, it also deals with the expectations of parents and how those don't necessarily sync up with reality. For instance, Willie Loman, up until the end of the book, is convinced that his son is going to be this great sporting star who's, he's going to be successful. He's going to be a wonderful person. However, in reality, his son is not doing very well at all. He hasn't played sports since high school. He actually ended up not passing high school because either he failed his math final or he got caught cheating on it. I can't recall. But he actually ends up just drifting around the country. But Willie is still convinced. He still, dogs that belief that one day his son is going to be great. And eventually that leads to his downfall in the end of the story. Third choice on this list is J.D. Salinger's Catcher in the Rye. Catcher in the Rye is an interesting story. And it's interesting in the fact that Holden Caulfield, and, well, actually about the entire book, the book is written from the perspective of a teenager. However, at the time of writing, J.D. Salinger was not a teenager. He was much older, and he had experienced the horrors of World War II. And he was very much scarred by his experiences, and that kind of shows through in the book in how Holden has this kind of disconnect with reality, almost in the same way that Willy Loman does. However, Willy Loman does it because he has expectations for his children. Holden's disconnect with reality is more about the fact that he doesn't want the world to change, and that he can't accept the way the world actually is, as opposed to the way he wishes it were. And this is evident in how he deals with his sister, Phoebe, how he, when he takes her to the park, at the end of the book, which is the climax, he has that sort of moment where he realizes, there's that ring that the kids are supposed to reach for as they go around on the merry-go-round. And she's trying to reach it, and he's scared that she's going to fall off. But he realizes that you kind of have to let them do that. And that wraps back around to that theme of Holden being a catcher in the rye, someone who's stopping these children from falling off this cliff because they can't see through the rye field. Holden realizes that it's impractical to try and stop the flow of time, and that he has to accept that this is the way things are going to be, that things have to keep moving. And it's evident that he doesn't want things to change in the way that he talks about certain people and certain things. Excuse me. For instance, when he goes to the museum, he praises it up and down for the way that things haven't changed since he was there as a kid. He is very much very much in favor of the idea that things should not change, and he doesn't want them to change. This is evident throughout the entire book, that he is very much against change, but at the end he has to come to accept it. And that's what really makes this book important. This book is about acceptance, at least of the fact that things can't always be either the way you want, like in Death of a Salesman, or the way things used to be. And that's another theme of our number 2 choice on this list, F. Scott Fitzgerald's The Great Gatsby. Now, this was very close to being my number 1 pick. The Great Gatsby deals with a lot of things. It's almost kind of a culmination of all the other books we've talked about. It deals with the post-World War I trauma, with Gatsby having fought in the First World War. It deals with expectations and how Gatsby idolizes Daisy and wishes things were a certain way and thinks that they will be a certain way. Like Catcher in the Rye, not only does Gatsby not want things to change, he actually wants to go back to the past. Because what Gatsby does is, in his want to be with Daisy, he is attempting to go back to a time before the First World War, before Daisy had married Tom Buchanan. Gatsby, like Holden, wants to go back to the past, except Gatsby never has that realization that Holden does, which kind of is what works with having Nick Carraway be the narrator, in that Nick Carraway portrays Gatsby in a very sympathetic light, and in doing so, he makes us root for Gatsby, even to the end, when Gatsby is finally killed because he stays by someone who, in essence, doesn't really deserve it, and actually is indirectly responsible for his death. But what makes this book one of the top 5 books in literature is how it deals with these themes, and just how iconic the characters are, and again, how tight Fitzgerald's prose is. This book hardly breaks 100 pages. Whereas, obviously, The Sun Also Rises, it's a decently sized book, as is, Catcher in the Rye, even though this isn't actually Catcher in the Rye. Death of a Salesman is also fairly small, but that's for a play. So they don't have to bother with the exposition. They just put that in the notes or in throwaway dialogue. Now, the number 1 pick for the top 5 books in literature is The Old Man and the Sea by Ernest Hemingway. Now, I find it odd that this is the top choice for this list, because it does not really deal directly with a lot of the themes from the other 4 books, which, in my opinion, are central concepts to exploring the human condition: acceptance of the past, dealing with expectations, things of that nature, things that everyone eventually has to realize. The Old Man and the Sea is less about those things. It's more just an exploration of human suffering and about the way in which endurance conquers all. It's essentially, to summarize everything, it's a book about dealing with suffering, dealing with pain, and how reality, no matter how important you think you are, is never going to acknowledge the fact that you're in pain. The universe does not care, essentially. Now, that is not to say that this book is anti-religion or anything. In fact, there are some very similar parallels between the main character of Santiago and Jesus, as he, hauls his mast back up the hill at the end of the book and then presumably dies. It does not comment on religion. This is more a book about coming to terms with the fact that the universe does not care. And that's actually another theme of the series of books that was going to be one of my honorable mentions and was almost my number 5 pick on Over the Sun Also Rises, The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, which does essentially what The Old Man and the Sea does. However, it does it for comedic value. Whenever you go into anything The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy deals with, people ask the question, why is this way? Why is there a restaurant that watches the end of the universe over and over again? It doesn't matter. There doesn't need to be an explanation. Things simply are the way they are. And that's why I think this is a really important book to literature. It won the Nobel Prize for Ernest Hemingway. The prose is incredibly tight. Again, this is even smaller than Gatsby. However, this covers more complex themes than Gatsby. However, it does deal with less of them. That's why I think these 5 books are the top 5 books in literature that you should read immediately. Especially, because I really believe that reading about even fictional stories, but biographies are also something that are good, that reading things like this about how to deal with suffering, about characters dealing with expectations and how reality isn't always the way you want it, is very much not only a good idea, but it's almost necessary for people to learn this before you have to confront in your own life, which would obviously be a lot more painful. However, you never really learn until you have to go through it. But that's an entirely different idea for a different, more philosophical video. In any case, that's been my time. Thank you for watching. Remember to like, subscribe, and share this video, and be sure to come back for the next one. I'll see you.